Hi everyone, and welcome to the Princeton Review's webinar, Unlocking the Secret of Medical School Admission. My name is Anna, and I am with the Princeton Review's National Marketing Team, and I will be helping to host this evening's presentation. A few things before we do get started. Everyone's lines are muted, so if you do have a question or you have something you'd like to share with us, please go ahead and use the question box on your GoToWebinar menu bar. We will do our best to get to everyone's questions. However, if we are unable to answer your question directly, we will be able to follow up with you after the webinar. Secondly, tonight's session is being recorded, and so don't feel the need to take notes. It's not necessary because everyone will be receiving a copy of this webinar recording within 48 hours after tonight's session. Okay, so unlocking the secret of medical school admission. So before we get started, again, like I said, my name is Anna. I am actually located in Long Island, New York. It's just fun to share sometimes where our presenters are located so that you guys can get a better understanding of where we are and just know that we are real people on the other end of the line. And tonight's presenter is our own in-house medical school admissions expert, Anita Pardue, and Anita will be joining with us to share with you all of her expertise and tips and strategies to help you guys get into medical school. And I am going to pass it on right over to Anita now so that she can give you a little background of her experience, and then we will get started right into the presentation. So Anita, it's all yours.
All right. Let's go, folks. So let's buckle up because I know you're here to try to get as much information as you can about what you need to do to get into med school. So the first thing I need to let you guys all know is been there, done that. So the tips I'm going to share with you tonight are not me trying to be condescending to you guys or wiping you over the nose about anything. These are the mistakes I made, and I'm trying to help you guys figure out from that. So how did I get here? Okay, so I did my undergrad at NC State, and I was a Wolfpacker. I was a cheerleader there. I'm sure you guys will pick that up from me talking to you. So I did an undergrad in architectural design and pre-med zoology, and I went to medical school at Chapel Hill. I've also done a master's in education. I did PhDs in physiology and pharmacology. Do not be impressed. Didn't want to get a job. You know, getting out of school meant you had to get a job. I spent years working for the World Health Organization and USAID, and so my background is actually in reproductive health and family planning, and so I used to develop contraceptive products and STD prevention techniques for third world countries, so I had offices in Zimbabwe and Haiti. And about 15 years ago, I came into the medical admissions process. I ran a pre-health program helping folks just like you figure out how to get into med school. We're going to talk a lot about those numbers. But in my years with working with medical admissions for primarily working with 5 different main med schools that I work with, as well as getting my kids in, I've worked with more than 10,000 applicants. And at the school that I worked with, the kids I was mentoring directly, we changed our acceptance rates from about the national average of about 38 to 42% to over 85%. I did not give them magic Kool-Aid, sprinkle fairy dust on them or anything. I really just changed the way that we did their applications. And those are the same tips I'm going to share with you guys, and it's what I do with Princeton Review now. So let's talk about what we're going to do tonight. So we're going to break this down mainly into 3 main things that we're going to do. So next slide. So we're going to give you a little background on the numbers, where we get to and everything, and then I'm going to channel into all these things you guys are putting into your applications, how you want to think about them, and then give you some ideas about how maybe we can help you. So let's get started. Next. And there we go. So what does it take to get into med school? So let's look at the numbers first, okay? So on the average, let's figure out exactly how many students there are and who's getting in. Next slide. Thanks, Anna. Okay, so it's daunting, the number of kids who get in. So you guys are all bright, okay? You're intelligent kids, and as a general rule, you knew you were getting into college, all right? But that step from college to medical school, the numbers are so different. So that's the first thing you got to wrap your head around. On an average year, and these are stats from 2015, there are close to 53,000, and we topped over that, 53,000 applicants for about 19 to 20,000 slots on any given year, okay? And in an acceptance year, you'll get maybe 41% of kids in. What does that mean? There's more kids sitting on the sidelines at the end of an application process who didn't get in than who actually did get in. So the way I like to tell you guys to think about it, and our next slide highlights that, is getting into med school is kind of like going from college athletics to getting into the pros. All right? So you may have been a good high school athlete, and there's a small number of those folks who will get a scholarship to play college football or college basketball. And in that group, they're really good. They're the best basketball players that you've ever met. It's the same thing. You guys are high achievers. You're doing the right things. You're getting everything you need to get your application together. And in comparison to a lot of kids, I'm sure folks stand around and go, man, I can't believe everything you do. Your GPA is so good. It's kind of like that great basketball player, but the kids who go from that college basketball to actually making it in the pros is a small number. It's kind of the same thing for you getting into med school. So how do we put this all together? And this applies, if any of you guys have logged on who want to go to optometry school or podiatry school or pharmacy or PA, I've worked with all of these folks, and the strategies are the same across the board. So let's talk a little bit about the first thing, because everybody asks. The first thing you're focusing on is GPA and test score. So let's just look right here. If we're looking at last year's number, there are those who applied, but what we want to focus on is what about the people who actually got in? And what you see here is that the mean or the average MCAT is about, under the old system, about 31.4, okay? Which in today's standards translates to about a 511, 512, okay? The average GPA is about a 3.7. So that means an average. So yes, that means there are people below that and people above it. But let's go back to what we were talking about. Over 53,000 applications. And let me give you guys a little sort of stream of thought about this. The average med school will get about 10,000 applications. 10,000. They will sift through those to grant about 500 interviews for maybe 100 slots. So you got about a 1 in 20 chance of getting an interview and about a 1 in 100 chance of getting that seat. Now, before you guys all go out and slit your wrists, that doesn't mean nobody's ever going to med school. It happened, but it's more than just your GPA and your test score, but schools have to find a way to screen. So oftentimes a numeric or a computerized screen is used to get those kids through. So one of the most common questions I get is, I know my GPA or my MCAT's not quite there, but I've done all this other stuff. And the problem is, and it's frustrating, you've got to have those baseline mnemonics to get through to that next level. So let's go on and let's think about, what do I need to do to get into med school? So the next slide will bring us to some thoughts about where we want to be. So how do you make yourself stand out? So I want to kind of use this analogy, and I'm going to skip because I'm sure you guys have all heard it, that being a special snowflake, how do you stand out? And if you think about it, you're talking about, I've got this and this and this in my application, they should see me. But in a pool of 53,000 kids who are all high achieving, great GPA, great MCAT, it's like a snowflake getting caught in a blizzard. And how do you make your snowflake sparkle a little differently or stand out in the crowd? And the key is not as much what you do, but how you present them. So let's talk, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on this next slide because we're going to break it down. So there are 5 main points that I want you guys to think about your application, okay? So the first thing I want you guys to do when we get through with this webinar is sit back, think about yourself as an applicant, be it whether you're starting this journey now or you're getting ready to apply this year, and go, what am I going to bring to the table in these 5 areas? And I found that if we break it out, you're going to kind of be able to wrap your head around it. So those are academic, clinical, leadership, service, and social. And by the way, that social is not your dating schedule. I hope you guys all do well with that in college, but we're going to find out what that is. So let's start with academics. We've already talked a little bit about your GPA and your test score, and those are very critical. We've said they're going to get you through the screen. So one of the things for you guys to think about is GPA and test score are important, but if they're comparing one-to-one, unfortunately, your MCAT is going to carry more weight than your GPA, okay? So what we often say is that a really strong GPA with a solid MCAT is what you're shooting for, okay? But a poor MCAT score kills a 4.0 GPA, but a really strong MCAT will definitely help the slightly lower GPA. So when we're talking like a 3.4, a 3.5, and that's really hard for some people to think about, because in college, the kids with the 3.3 or the 3.4 consider doing really well. That's an A average. In med school application, that's the lower end of acceptance. So let's talk about the ranges for GPA first. We generally say about a 3.3 to obviously about a 3.4 is what you're shooting for. 3.3 to about a 3.5 is kind of considered the lower end. 3.5 to about a 3.6, 3.65 is about the land of mediocrity, and a 3.7 to a 4.0 is a pretty shiny little GPA. Now, one of the things I want to talk to you guys about is we said the average admitting GPA is a 3.7, and I used to get this all the time. Kids come into my office and they'd be like, "Oh my goodness, Dr. Pardue, I'm going to get a B in chemistry, or I'm going to get a C." And I build a bridge and get over it. Okay, 1 C never kept anyone out of med school. 15 C's might, but not 1 C. Because if the average admitting GPA is a 3.7, that means some folks probably got not A's. So it's not the end of the world, but your continued performance is important. I often get asked, I didn't do real well in the beginning, but I made increasing strides. Yes, we look for improvement over time. So there's no dead set formula, but also be realistic that if you're at a 3.3 or a 3.4, it's going to be tougher for you. There are things you may need to do to augment that GPA, but just because you've got a 4.0 doesn't mean you're a shoo-in either. When we talk about MCAT, it's the same thing. And unfortunately, it is one of the strongest stringent rectifiers of what we look at and whether or not you're going to get in. Okay, it's a screening modality. Med schools say that it often reflects how you're going to do on your boards. Boards reflect residency placements. Residency placements reflect medical school standings. So it does trickle on down. And I have seen more of the absolute greatest applicants be held out because they couldn't achieve that MCAT score. So please take it seriously. Please allot the time. And if you go in with that score, be realistic about where you're going to fall out on that. One of the other things before we move on from this is I very often hear kids go, I know my GPA isn't quite where it is. I know my MCAT score is not quite right, but I just want to put my name in there because I want them to know that I'm really interested. There are 54,000 applicants. We don't need to know that you're just interested. They need to know that you're realistic and you've thought about your application. So if you're not ready to apply, just rolling the dice out there, A, it's expensive, and B, if you don't get in, you become a reapplicant. And there's a whole other standard for reapplicants that it gets more strict. So really think about and make yourself the best applicant. And the problem is, guys, I was right there with you. Okay, because you've gone through high school and the course was set for you, and you're going through college and it's fairly set. You know you got to take classes, you're trying to go from freshman to sophomore to junior, but this step of going from college to med school is much harder, and it's your career. And the path has never been laid out. There weren't gaps. And so oftentimes you freak out because I was the same way. You're like a little hamster on a treadmill. And it's like, I got to get through college. I got to get through to med school. Oh my goodness, if I have to take a year off, the world is going to end. I got news for you guys. I'm like a dinosaur, okay? I went to med school so long ago, we wrote our notes on like chiseled them out in stone, okay? It's a year in your life. Make yourself the best applicant. So what makes you the best applicant? Once you've dusted off your GPA and your MCAT, academics is more than just that. Academics includes things like research, study abroad. Have you worked as a TA or a tutor? Are you involved in honor programs? So let's touch on a few of those. One of the big myths is, oh my goodness, I haven't done any research. I'm never getting into med school. On the med school side of us reviewing it, we like to see people who have done research. Do not get me wrong. Research gives you an idea and a comprehension of what it takes to get to the research discoveries when you're in med school. Okay? But if you really want research to have teeth on your application, something that's really going to stand out as an experience, a minimum of a semester, ideally a year, involved in lab research. If you don't have that, that doesn't mean you're not going to get in. But don't put it as a peacock feather in your cap if you really haven't put that time in it. Publications are great. They are not make or break. We don't go, oh my goodness, look, they were published. What we're looking to see is, did you get an idea from the research you did what research is all about? Okay? What about study abroad? So study abroad is great for the experience that it is, but one of the things that we like to see in study abroad, and please don't encapsulate that just to, oh, I've got to go away for a semester. It could be 6 weeks over the summer. It could be a mission trip. It could be a couple of spring break trips. Time where you get out of the country into different cultures, exposed to different types of societies. This brings you to two different understandings. If you guys step back and think about any time you've ever gone, maybe you've traveled internationally or you've gone somewhere, I can guarantee you that you guys were never 100% of the time completely comfortable where you were. And that's good to know, because we always talk about walking in somebody else's shoes. One of the most important parts about being a physician is being empathetic and to be able to understand what other people have experienced, understanding of cultures, understanding of hardships, and being outside your comfort zone. You're going to hear me say this repeatedly, okay, because think about the times maybe when you've gone to a doctor, okay, and you've got something wrong with you, but you're not quite sure what it is. When you're going into that physician's office, you're more vulnerable. You are the patient. You don't know what's going on. You don't know what they're going to do to you. Being outside your comfort zone, studying abroad or something like that, helps you gain relatable experience that you can relate in personal statements, that you can relate in secondaries. All of these are not just about what you do, but how you change through it. Let's talk about being a TA or a tutor. Whether it's paid or it's volunteer TAing or tutoring, that is excellent for learning how to work with other people and to break down information into ways that people can understand it. Again, when you put that experience down on your application, when you talk about it in the secondary, we are looking to see, can you reflect how you grew through that? Okay, so an example, I taught at a university for almost 15 years, and one of the hardest concepts for people to understand was mRNA to protein synthesis. How did they figure that out? And I actually broke down the whole process of protein synthesis as like cooking from a cookbook. That DNA is a giant cookbook, and when you want to cook a recipe, you make the mRNA. You pick out a recipe and write it down from your cookbook. Then you have to assemble it. Your tRNA goes and picks up the groceries, the amino acids. Then you assemble it all together in your kitchen. That's your rRNA, and you put them all together. Think of ways that you can take complicated information and explain it to people. Well, and you're going, how's that important? Well, think about it. As a physician, the thing is, you can be the greatest doctor in the world, but if you walk up to your patient and you go, you got diabetes, you won't die, your patients are not going to listen to you because they have just shut you out. You've scared them to death. They don't understand. Finding ways that you can relate to your patient, communicate, and explain is one of the greatest secrets to being a good clinician. So we're looking for, have you acquired those skills? You know, another part of academics is knowing another language. Can you communicate with your patients? So think about academics and what you bring to the table outside of just those key things. Now, clinical. You guys get all worried about clinical, and I'm going to tell you it's important. And as a junior or a senior, or if you're a non-traditional person coming back or whatever, we want to know you want to be a doctor, and you want to be a doctor because you've shadowed one doctor for 8 hours or even 20 is not going to get it for us. So there's two ways we look at clinical. The first is the experiences you have. Diversity over quantity is always more important. I would rather see someone who is shadowed in 3 to 5 different areas for a total of 100 hours than somebody who's done 500 hours with an orthopedist. We want to see that you've gained an understanding of what you want to do. All right, and clinical shadowing is hard to come by, okay? You've got to be diligent. Ask your primary care doctor, and by the way, in terms of your clinical shadowing, at least one of them should be some area of primary care. Family medicine, general internist, pediatrics, obstetrics, something that is primary care driven in this day and time. Ask your doctor, ask your parents' doctor, okay? Ask a specialist that maybe you've been to. Cold calling, reach out to office managers, and when you ask, don't ask for an internship. You don't know enough to be out there and have somebody tagging along. You're a college student. How about if I told you I've got a kindergarten student who wants to tag along behind you for the next month and a half? You might let them come for a day, but not a month and a half. It's the same thing for a physician. So ask them if you can shadow 1 or 2 half days. That's manageable for them. So try to build and acquire your clinical experience. Other things, volunteer at an indigent care clinic. Gain experience, do a medical mission trip or a spring break trip. International count, don't make it all international. Now, one other thing is we really like to see folks try to get some type of paid clinical, be it get your CNA and work in a nursing home. Become a medical scribe. Check out Scribe America or Elite Scribes. Get your EMT and do ride-alongs on an ambulance. All of these things are beneficial. Okay, and that's why sometimes, kids often go, should I take a gap year? We're actually seeing probably upwards of 60% of our kids take gap years, and I've honestly never had a student take a gap year that it wasn't beneficial. The average admitting age to medical school is about 27. You have tons of time. The only time a gap year does not benefit you is if you do absolutely nothing in it and sit at home and play video games. But if you use it productively to gain more experience, more research, or whatever, it will benefit you and the world will not end, okay? But why is clinical important? And I get people who often say, why medicine? Why do I want to be a physician? Here's a key soundbite. Learning to be a physician is not about you. The minute you think that being a physician is about you, and I get this all the time, I go, why do you want to go to med school? And they go, I really like science and I want to help and serve people. And I hear that so much that it's just, and I get that. You guys really do, and I get that sincerely. But to get an understanding, if you went to the grocery store last week and somebody bagged your groceries and they didn't put your eggs on the bottom with the canned food on top of it, they helped and they served you. It is so much deeper than that. As physicians, we're kind of like auto mechanics, okay? We, like mechanics, are trained with knowledge to fix something. They fix cars, we fix people. They are given tools to be able to fix a car. We are trained with knowledge and tools to help fix people. And they are people. They are not patients. And again, remember I told you guys that I'm just like you guys. I've been there, and I want to help you understand this. So when I went and decided I wanted to go to med school, I thought I was all that in a bag of chips because I had shadowed, I had done all kinds of things, and I was lucky enough to get a position working in a burn unit at a hospital in our county. For 4 years I worked in that burn unit, every holiday, every weekend, everything I could. By the time I applied, I thought I had about 4,000 hours of clinical experience, and I did. I thought I had it all under control. I was like, just give me my medical degree, I know what's going on. I'd started IVs, everything. And I got a rude awakening because one day when we were in the ER, there was a couple that came in from, they were coming home from their honeymoon, and a drunk driver crossed the road and hit their car head on. He was thrown from the car, she was stuck in the car, and she was there, and he went back to pull her out. and he was burned over 75% of his body, third-degree burns. He spent the next 2 months in our burn unit on a ventilator. And it was the first day that we actually had a chance to get him off that ventilator. And it was a pretty amazing day because it was the first time that his wife had spent with him in almost 2 months since they got married. And I happened to be in doing his wound changes that day while they were talking. And it was the coolest thing listening to them. And they were laughing about where they were going to go on vacation. And he made jokes about how he's afraid the little dog would be afraid of him, their dog. And they talked about their kids. And they talked for about 30 minutes. And I was doing his dressings. And I was like, yeah, that's why I'm going to be a doctor. I'm fixing these people. And he told her he was tired. And he asked her if she wouldn't mind going and getting him a milkshake from the cafeteria. And she was so excited. I mean, she like puffed up because she was going to do something for him. And she turned to walk out the door, and I watched him, and he watched her take every single step to the elevator, which was right outside his door. He watched her push the button and get into the elevator, and the door closed. And I thought, God, that's the sweetest thing I've ever seen. And he turned and he looked at me, and he took a big, deep breath, and he said, thank you. And he closed his eyes, and my patient coded right there in front of me. And he let go, and they ran a full code, and my patient died before his wife got back up there that day. And I really wasn't sure I could do medicine anymore. I was just, it wiped me out. So for about 2 weeks, I wandered around the burn unit, and my attending came up to me, and he said, you don't get it, do you? And I'm like, what? I don't get what? And he said, you're one of the best nursing assistants we've ever had here. You can fix and stipend and everything. He said, but you're still thinking medicine's about you. And he said, that was that person. He said, we knew that guy wasn't going to make it. He knew he wasn't going to make it. He fought to that moment to give back to her. And they shared that moment. And he said, we take care of a person who has a whole life going on outside of them. He left behind a wife. He left behind a mother. And as a mother, our kids should never pass before we do. He said, every person that walks into your office, you need to remember them. And you need to remember that we are gifted with the greatest career in the world because people give back to us every day. We grow and learn through the patients, the people we take care of. And I have held on to that for that minute. And for now, that's as you guys go through your clinical experiences, absorb every part of it. Absorb and relate how you saw that patient interaction. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for the I get it point. Comes to the same thing. When it comes to leadership, we've all taken on leadership positions. We don't care if you're the president of the Mickey Mouse Club or, you know, the president of your university. I mean, we actually do, but leadership is important for what you learn and how you grow through your leadership. So when you talk about what you did, you want to share and relate your experiences, but how you grow through it. Show the humbleness. I guarantee every one of you have taken on a leadership position, and before you took it on, it was like, yeah, I see that leader. I can do it better than you. And then you get in that position, and you stand there and go, why won't anybody listen to me? Why isn't everybody as motivated as me? We are looking at you as future leaders in your practice. And in your practice, the people who work for you will need to be able to count on you and to respect you because they're dependent on you for their salaries. But by the same token, they need to feel valued. They need to feel part of your team. If you treat your front desk person like they're worthless and they have an attitude and they tick off the people coming in, by the time they get to you, they're already upset. So a good leader inspires respect in the people they lead, but they also make them feel part of a team. In the leadership that you do, think how you're going to reflect that in your discussion of your personal statement and your secondaries. Service, it's the same thing. Look for service that you do regularly over a continuum, over a period of time that takes you outside your comfort zone. Things like volunteering with hospice, where you really are working hand in hand with people who are at the end part of their life and facing that stuff you may never see. Volunteering at a VA where people who have seen the ravages of war. Volunteering with programs like Boys and Girls Club mentoring programs or mentoring kids with Big Brother, Big Sister, where you actually get an opportunity to give back to kids who may have been through things that we can't even comprehend. You know, one of the programs that we used to run at my university was a program called, we did a program for the homeless where we fed the homeless every Sunday. Everybody does work with the homeless, okay? One Sunday we had been down there and we'd been handing out our lunches, and for the longest time the kids were like, oh, look what we do. We make and pack lunches for the homeless. And I always made them stay and talk with the people we worked with afterwards. And one particular week we were out there and we were handing out lunches, and my son had just handed out his last lunch, and a little kid pulled on his shorts and he said, Mister, do you have any more? He said, my mom and sister and I haven't eaten in the past 2 days and we're really hungry. And my son looked at me and had big tears in his eyes because he knew we'd given out our last lunch. Well, one of those days, every week we feed this one lady who's always in her van. She's in a wheelchair. She can't get out, and we always take her lunch first. And I heard her call to my son, and she held her lunch out the window and motioned for him to come get it. And he got the lunch and handed it to the little kid, and the little kid scampered off. And my son turned and looked at me and he goes, we don't really do anything here, do we? And he said, and I said, nope. And he said, she just did more for that kid in 1 second than we do the whole time we're here because she gave her one meal. And that's an appreciation through your service. You need to grow and change and understand through the service you do. And if you relate that, then you'll be successful. And then the last is social, and that's a big thing for us, okay, because we see kids all the time who are hard studiers and getting all their check boxes, but we want to know that there is more depth to you, because when we're interviewing you in a med school interview, we're looking to see how you're going to fit into a class and how relatable you're going to be to patients. Okay, so we want to know, what are your other interests? Do you have outlets? Because med school's really tough, so we're looking for those outlets so that we know that you're going to bring something to our class and you've got a way when things get really tough to release things. So this is where along this continuum, if you think about it, the average typical traditional student is going to apply the summer after their junior year. That's 2.5 summers, 2.5 years, maybe 3. So you really, your journey is a journey, not a sprint. And it starts the day you start your freshman year. And if you're not ready your junior year, what do? Take that additional time. We like the older applicant. If you're a non-traditional applicant, we love it because you're older. You've been out and worked and paid bills and understand what hardships are. Harness what you bring to an application. So where do we go from here? Next slide. Okay, so let's think about when you're going to apply. So traditionally, whether you're applying after your junior year, your senior year, as a non-traditional, in the year that you're going to apply, and this shows this your junior year, but what I recommend, and the kids I work with, we don't start in March, April, May. We start in November through January, brainstorming thought processes about your personal statement, your activities, etc. I set a deadline of February for the first draft of a personal statement, March for the first draft of your experiences that you're going to put in your AMCAS application. I want your letters of recommendation and everything finalized by April, because keying opens in May, and you want to start keying in your application, inputting it, sending your transcripts so that the day that the application's open, if you have a test score and you know you're submitting or you're retesting, you want to go ahead and submit, because it takes AMCAS about 4 to 6 weeks to verify your application. I know that it says that applications are accepted through November, but you want to be in the first 4 to 6 weeks. It's rolling admissions. You want to be the first ones through. You want to be the first ones through for the interviews. That is the strategy we give. So the next slide will talk about where we go from there. So types of applications. If we're talking medical, there is AMCAS for our MD programs. Texas has their own application system, and ACOMAS for our osteopathic programs. All right. So one of the things, and we'll talk a little bit about DO, but we've seen the parameters with respect to AMCAS. Personal statement, 5,300 characters. Texas, 5,000 characters plus 2 additional essays. ACOMAS is going to be 4,700 characters. So you're just going to take your primary and pare it down. They're all going to ask you to list your experiences, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So what are the parts of your application? So our next slide. You're going to have your primary, and this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that students make, because I always say, how many schools are you going to apply to? And I get the answer, I'm going to apply to as many because all I want to do is get in. Okay, you're getting ready to commit 4 years of your life and a very costly expense. Do your research. Okay, I had a student the other year who applied to 120 programs. Okay, so let's think about it, and that includes MD and DO programs. If you're good enough to get into Harvard, you probably don't need to apply to a lower tier school. And if you need to apply to a lower tier school, you're probably not going to get into a top 10. Be realistic. Use the websites out there to look at, and there's one called bestmedschools.com, and there's the MSAR. I say start to sort with the best med schools, create your list, go to the MSAR, which AMCAS has online, review your individual schools, create a list of schools within your range, put if you want a couple of reach schools, maybe a couple of safety. But remember, there really aren't safety. But look at things that are within the GPA and the test score you have. If your GPA and your test score aren't there, address it. Get additional graduate level work. Retake your MCAT. And before I move on, because everybody asks this question, as we know, 3 times in a year, max of 5. We really set some standards on that. We do not care if you take and you have to retake your MCAT. Trust me, I took it back in the day. Nobody told me to study. I got spanked. Okay, and then I studied. I actually took a Princeton review course, and I went from a 24 to a 38. Thank you, Princeton. All right, it can happen, but you've got to put the effort into it. And if you look at what their averages are, they are there for a reason, and you're fighting in that very competitive pool. If your GPA is on the lower end, address it. There are so many wonderful 1-year, 2-year master's programs in a science, and that's a key thing. If your science GPA is low and you're going to get grad level coursework, then it needs to be in a science-based master's. The rule of thumb is we like to see 1 year completed grad work or 30 hours of graduate level coursework before you apply. So if you've got a low GPA and you're starting a master's program, don't apply then. We haven't seen any coursework. You need to invest that time. It is 1 year of your life for your future. Okay, the kids go, I'm going to apply to 40, 50 schools. Well, first of all, the average is about 10 to 20, and that's a lot. Okay, think about the schools. Think about the areas. Do the math. Okay, let's say 11 schools. All right, if you apply, it's $160 for this first school. Then it's $30 for each school afterwards. So 30 times 10, if you're applying to just 11, that's another $300. About 85% of schools automatically send secondaries now. That doesn't mean they send them out whether they look at you or not, because there's no guarantee because you get a secondary, you're going to get anything else. Average cost for a secondary is about $75 and at least another 2 to 3 essays. So 75 times 11, that's another $825. So just out the gate, you're looking at $1,285. Then if you're granted interviews, then you've got travel and all that. And it's so different from college. On a good year, you hope to apply to 20 to 30 schools, getting secondaries from 85% of those. On a fantastic year, you're going to get 5 to 6 interviews. I know that's hard for people to understand coming from college, but that's a great year in hoping to get 1 to 2 acceptances. All right, interviews start in about August. They run roughly to January or February, and admissions roll anywhere from the first day to admit about October 15th all the way through. There are a few schools that only do one admit in March. All students are supposed to pick a school by the end of April, April 30th. It is a year-long exhaustive process. So there's your primary application. Kids often think, okay, I've got this, I'm done, my primary submitted. Primary is your transcripts, your personal statement, your 15 experiences, and your letters of recommendation. I'll touch on those briefly. But then there are secondaries. Think about that. Think every application, 2 to 3 more essays where you will relate who you are. And then come the interviews. So it's multiple stage processes. So don't just think once you get your application out the door, you're done. Next slide. So personal statement tips. I know we're running out of time, so I want to give you some key pointers here. When you think about your personal statement, 5,300 characters, mull it around in your head. Start thinking in November through January. Then outline. You want to set an outline roughly of 5 to 6 paragraphs. Your first paragraph should be a catch. Think about reading a book and something that catches your attention, some aha moment, something that leads you through. It can be a quote, it can be an experience, it can be a statement, or whatever. Then use the next 3 to 4 paragraphs with rolling transitions to talk about your journey to this point. Avoid the use of the word I. Avoid saying why I want to be a doctor. What we know you want to be a doctor, you're applying. Avoid things that are ever negative, like unlike other people, I chose to major in. Just back up what you do. Avoid making excuses. I couldn't get as many clinical hours because I had to work. Instead, return that. One of the big things and the big hurdles for me was I paid for my entire college education. This required me working 20 to 30 hours a week. It often meant sacrificing this, but I learned this. Always put the positive spin. If you have major hiccups, you can highlight them in your personal statement, like if you have a sudden drop in GPA or if you had a major hardship. But also remember you have an opportunity on your AMCAS application and in secondaries. Almost every secondary says, is there something else you would like for us to understand about you? That's where you can talk to it about. Always put a positive spin on it. Use those 3 to 4 paragraphs to talk about your journey. At least one of your paragraphs needs to be clinical and a clinical experience that you grew and learned from. Others can be research, service, leadership, things you've overcome, whatever. You should outline your 5 paragraphs. You should bullet point under them what you're going to talk about. Then sit down, write it out, set it aside for a day. Come back, review it, cut it down. Set it aside. Have lots of people read it. And please don't just have family members read it. Have people who don't really know you and see if they can figure out what you're talking about. And then when you get to the last paragraph, let it be reflective to back from where you started and give it a positive challenge for the future. And that's hard in 5,300 characters, but that's what you're trying to reflect. Also remember, try to include at least 1 to 2 stories because they will be memorable and stand out to us. Next. You get your personal statement. Next thing is your 15 most meaningful experiences. As a part of our program, we have all types of tips, and I work with people on how you put these together. But think about grouping things. Don't just say Dean's List all semesters. First of all, you're applying. I hope you were on the Dean's List. But maybe create a category that is honors and awards, and underneath that, list that. Maybe you create a category rather than saying shadowed this doctor, put unpaid shadowing as one of your experiences. Then put all of your shadowing experiences there. That gives you more total hours and more length of time. Another thing is people often write long paragraphs under there. Well, you can't write very long because you got characters, but you write paragraphs under there. A better idea is to make it a heading that says like growth, and the things that you grew from, what your duties were. All of this I work with students on, but it's breaking it out so we see key, I don't want to say bulleted because you can't bullet in the experiences, but you can see clearly broken out statements of what you did, what you learned, how you changed. And that's how you should approach your experiences and group them together. Another thing is sometimes I'll see folks who will only put 3 or 4 in their 15. If you can only come up with 3 or 4, you may not be ready to apply. Also, don't just put 15 nonsense things. I'd rather see 12 or 13 really strong than 15 fluffy things. All right, next thing. Secondaries and interviews, same thing. In your secondaries, use the same concepts you use with your personal statement, but this is where you can highlight more journey, more understanding of all of those key points, your academic, your clinical, your service and leadership. And when we come to interviews, it is a strategy. And I need you guys to understand, and I'm going to finish up and turn it over for questions, but one of the things about interviewing is we're trying to figure out who you are, how you present yourself. Your interview comes from the way you dress, the way you meet, the way you introduce yourself when you shake the hand of the person you're going to interview with, how you create the dynamics with that person. So it is so much more than just the questions you answer. And the bigger thing is, I want you guys to think about your interview like if you've ever seen the Jake from State Farm commercial where the wife comes downstairs, she goes, "Who are you talking to?" "Jake from State Farm." "What's she wearing?" Khakis." "She sounds hideous." You have seen that commercial so many times, you tune it out. As interviewers, I have heard you guys want to help serve people so many times, we tune it out. Think about your interview as your opportunity to sell your selling points. This is where I work with you guys. We sit down and we put what your selling points are. Think about your favorite movie or your favorite TV show, okay? You don't remember all the dialogue. You remember key, memorable scenes. In your interview, they're not going to remember all your words or your dialogue. They're going to remember one of the best quotes in the world. Maya Angelou says, "People will not remember what you said or what you did, but how that you made them feel." You want to relate to them things that will make them feel, make them laugh, make them sad, make them moved, whatever. You guys may not remember a lot of what I said, but I guarantee you, you will remember my story about that man in the burn unit and how you felt when I brought you up and she was leaving and how happy they were, and then he died. And that's a true story. But you will remember that because it stands out in your mind. We couch your interviews so your interviewer will, when he opens it up to the committee, we go, "Oh, that's the person who did such and such." It is all a process of how you present yourself. Next slide. Okay, so who do I help? I have worked with you all. Whatever the specialty is, I work for freshmen, and I love getting freshmen coming in because we can work on each step of this and what you're working on. So I work with freshmen and sophomores. I work with the traditional applicant. That's a lot of folks that we're getting in right now. And we'll start working with our main applicants for next year in March, but in just a minute I'll show you what we're doing right now. But those are people applying in their junior year or their senior year, taking a gap year. But there are also the non-traditional. You're changing majors, you're coming back, you've had a prior career, and we can work with that. And then most importantly, reapplicants also. Because as a reapplicant, one of the things are you need to go to schools that you got an interview and you didn't get in and ask for an exit interview to find out what happened. You, before you apply, need to be able to make a statement in your personal statement to talk about how you are different, things you have done to address the reasons you didn't get in, and I can help with that too. Next slide. All right, that's what I was saying. As a part of what we do with Princeton Review, we have tons of packages that help with personal statement review, personals with interview, but it's really the whole process. And so it's getting you from your primary, getting your secondaries done, getting your interview prep done, how do you follow up after your interview, letters of intent, all the follow-up, how you communicate. So typically, we start working with people on their primary applications or the primary comprehensive in March. But right now, we're actually running a pre-app to comprehensive and a pre-app primary package where you get the whole pre-application part for free. It's a $500 value, and we're giving it to you guys free. And the reason we're doing it right now is it lets you get a jump start on getting your personal statement done, getting your letters of recommendation done, getting your 15 activities together. That timeline I talked to you about, we'll work on getting your primary, your personal statement, draft done in February, getting your experiences done in March, getting your letters and everything in by April, so that come May, you are ready to hit it. So a couple of key points, I'm going to turn it over for our questions. Letters of recommendation, as a general rule, if your school has a review committee, use it, because if we as an admissions committee know that you have a review committee and you didn't use it, that's automatically, hey, why didn't they? If you don't have a review committee, I recommend that you potentially find like a letter service like Interfolio or whatever to have your letters sent to and then sent to AMCAS. Part of the reason is you can start gathering those letters now confidentially, and then they can be uploaded directly to AMCAS. In terms of letters, you have to have at least 2 academic letters, ideally 2 science people, but we do know that a lot of schools are now asking for a non-science. So if you're at this point, try to gather 3 academic letters. Ideally, if you can get a clinical. If you're applying to osteopathic programs, try to get an osteopathic letter. I can help you gain shadowing with that. We have a network for that. If you've done research, so ideally you want 2 to 3 academic, 1 clinical if possible, and things that you've done extended in, so be it research or a service program or something you were a leader of. Avoid relatives, people who were on committees. We're not impressed by that, okay? Start asking for letters of recommendation now. We have a whole program for how you request those letters, and give them a deadline of April 30th. Most of them will be late, but if you set for April 30th, it gives you some leeway to get some time in there. When do I take my MCAT? You want to have taken your first MCAT attempt, if at all possible, by April or May. If you take it in April and any other time, I generally get your score back before you submit. If you take it in May, applications generally open around June 6th or 7th. You want to wait until you get your score back before you submit your primary application, because on their application they will ask, will you be retaking your MCAT? You want to have a score to know. A lot of you guys are like, I'm going to take it in the summer, I'm going to take it in July. That's really later than you should be taking. 2 signals to us as a review committee is, well, why, if you spent this long getting here, are you just taking your MCAT? Okay. The other part is they will hold your application to wait for those scores. And if in a rolling admission cycle, if they're waiting on that while other people are already getting interviews, you kind of get behind the 8 ball. Okay. So ideally between January and April or May, if you must, then sign up for the June. Then you can submit the 1st of June saying you are going to take. I know this is a ton of information, folks, and there is so much more to be offered. One of the things, and I know we mentioned it at the beginning of this, but if you have additional questions, through our program with what we do with our mentoring, I have a whole comprehensive dashboard. I work with you guys one-to-one to make it happen. We have this dashboard where you can submit questions to me. It pings me by text. I can send it back to you. It is real-time response to really help you cover. I've got all types of resources to help you with all of the things we've talked about. We do Skype, or I do Google Hangout for your interview prep. It's every step of this way, because I need you guys to understand, I've been there. I've done this. I bombed my MCAT and thought I was never going to get in, and I took it and knew I was going to get in. I know what it feels like to open that envelope, and every year you guys get in, it's the same feeling for me. So if you want to get some questions, you want to know some more information, you want to talk to one of our expert counselors, there's an email that you can email if you have additional questions. But we did have for you, because our job is to get you into your dream school, text that med consult to 877-877, and we'll have one of our consultants reach out to you to tell you about our programs, help answer your questions. I'm here to help you. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left. I just wanted to give you just some questions. You know, a lot of people ask about Caribbean med schools, and I do work with Caribbean med schools, particularly what we talk about, the Big Five. What you guys need to understand, though, is because people often ask, if I start in a Caribbean school, can I transfer to a U.S. med school? It's not like college. Once you matriculate into a school, it is pretty much next to impossible to transfer to another school. There are some extenuating, but as a general rule, these are guidelines. Okay, can Canadian residents and international residents get into U.S. med schools? Yes, you can. It is going to be a little bit stricter standard, which means your MCAT score is going to be a little bit higher. For Canadian residents, in most of our schools, you're kind of seen as just as out of state. International, the bar is higher, but it is possible. The one thing is you have to be able to guarantee that you can cover your tuition. Osteopathic. I will tell you guys, I am a huge, huge, huge proponent for osteopathic medicine. There are all of these misnomers. I guarantee you, most of you guys or somebody you know has seen a DO or an osteopathic physician. Honestly, if I had it to do over, I would probably go to osteopathic school because the training is the same in the core basics of a medical program, of an MD program, but there's a whole other additional, as I call it, a bag of tricks. Information, knowledge on manipulation, knowledge on nutrition that gives you a whole other layer. And now the mandate is that residency programs are open to MD and DO applicants. So there are equal number of slots. And ultimately your success, whether it is Caribbean, US MD, or DO, is going to depend on how you perform on your boards and how you do in your clinical rotations, okay? If you do Caribbean, though, you want to choose schools where you do your rotations in the US. Community college, if you are picking up additional prerequisites, please pick them up at a four-year institution. That does not mean that community college is not good. What I'm saying to you is there are great variations in the standards of community and online programs, and we really, really need to be able to standardize. So it may not be that your school's not that great, it's just that that's what we're standardizing. We do run into a lot of issues with like early college, where kids try to do those pre-health early college tracks and they come to us having taken all of their base prerequisites at a community college. And you need to do stronger in those upper level classes. But if at all cost, you may take one overseas, but as a general rule, try to keep at a four-year school. The other thing is some schools, like I know Florida and some other schools, have gone to all pass-fail. That is so tough for somebody applying. It's not going to completely keep you out of med school, but it's going to be a lot harder. They're going to look a lot harder at your MCAT score, and they may want to see some grad level coursework. Other questions I get are, how does a failing grade impact if I retake it and I get an A? Well, you need to understand that all grades, even if your school does grade exclusion, is going to count every grade you do. You only have to repeat courses that you get a C- in a prerequisite. A lot of kids will go, I got a C or a B-, should I retake it? Heck no, you shouldn't, okay? Because if you take it and get anything other than an A, it just looks like you took it twice and couldn't score. Take an upper level coursework. Now, I know that we're out of time here, and I've tried to cover just about everything that I could, but again, I'm here to help. We've got tons of resources, and if you're interested in any aspect, please reach out to our consultants, and I would love to work with you guys, but regardless, go forth, reach for your dreams. You can make this. Don't get discouraged. Just follow the tips we give you. All right, I'm going to turn it back over.
Thank you so much, Anita. That was fabulous. Again, I just want to reiterate a few things in regards to getting some of your questions answered. Again, you will be receiving this entire presentation, recording, and deck with all the slides in your email within 48 hours after tonight's session. So again, please don't worry if something was missed or you weren't sure about something that we had said. You'll be able to go back through this whole entire presentation and get those answers. Secondly, up on the screen right now, you should see our questions@review.com. If you do have any questions or anything you want to share with us or anything you'd like to ask, please send it to questions@review.com. And also, if you are interested in receiving a personalized consultation in regards to your medical school application and your process, definitely text MedConsult to 877-877 so one of our expert advisors can then give you guys a call over the next couple of days and get you set up. Again, thank you, Anita. I am really thrilled to have been able to spend this evening with you. I'm sure everyone else was too. And I hope everyone has a great night. Thank you again.
Thanks. I hope I get to work with you guys because I'm the consultant you work with. Thanks.